The Israel-Hamas war has divided the world, and even social media networks have been drawn in. The disinformation is spreading quick, but that's not all. Now, the world's most popular app, TikTok, has been accused of being anti-Israel, with calls growing to ban it in the United States of America. Well, the USA is Israel's biggest ally. It is also the nation where TikTok is most popular, with an audience of around 143 million as of October 2023. And according to statistics, now there are renewed calls for banning the entertainment app by members of the We Take a look at the controversy surrounding TikTok. And why do some Americans want to ban TikTok? The Chinese ownership of TikTok and the possibility of the Xi Jinping government controlling it has been a big concern among both Democrats and Republicans because of the threat to personal data. But the new calls for a ban come amidst the escalating Israel-Hamas war. According to a report in the New York Post, Republican lawmakers are worried about the tide of anti-Israel content on TikTok. Not just this, widely shared threat on X by Jeff Morris Jr., a tech investor and former executive with Tinder, wrote a now viral thread titled "The TikTok War," where he writes about why American students are getting the wrong information about Israel and Hamas. Before, in fact, we jump into a discussion, let's quickly look at this particular thread. I'm also going to introduce our guests right before that. Rakshmi Sawant, human rights activist, author, joins us on the show. Pathikrit Pine, international affairs expert, with us on the program too. Professor Madhav Nalapat, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, joining us on the platform as well. Last but not the least, Sumitra Goenka, social media expert, also with us on the show. In fact, I'm going to go over to the big screen and tell you what exactly is the fear and apprehension that is being pointed out by Jeff Morris Jr. Well, he goes on to say that the TikTok war is, of course, starting in schools and colleges, where kids are getting the wrong information about what Hamas and Israel are doing or are. In fact, he also goes on to put out a video showing a corridor in school where students can aggressively be seen chanting anti-Israel slogans and, in fact, siding with Hamas. These protests happened right after a New York Times article. And he also has put out some stats for us to see. The bigger red flag was, of course, seeing 51% of Americans between the ages of 24 believing that it's Hamas terrorists who raped and murdered innocent women and children were justified in what they were doing. That's exactly what Jeff Morris Jr. is talking about here. He also talks about how the data saw Israel and how TikTok has been projecting Israel as the real enemy and the culprit in the situation. As an ample, proof of what is going on in TikTok, he also goes on to say that the top hashtag is, of course, supporting Hamas and Palestine. The hashtag is 3B. That is 3 billion views of Palestine versus 200 million views for Israel is what is going on in TikTok. So there is obviously a lopsided approach, a lopsided misinformation campaign which is going on TikTok at this point in time. And of course, he talks about data. He talks about what paid commentators and paid commentary is also doing. They're all supporting Hamas. They're all supporting organizations that perhaps also support Hamas, and this could also be in turn a campaign which is being funded by some of the enemies of Israel. He also goes on to show that a lot of people who are standing with Palestine were looking for phrases and looking for words, which were easier to find. And when they looked for phrases and phases connected with Israel, it became all the more difficult. Twice as many posts with the stand with Palestine than stand with Israel in the United States, which is quite odd considering that the Bible Belt in the United States is extremely supportive of what the Americans do with Palestine, with Israel, I beg your pardon, and how they support Israel in this war. In the US, there have been 8,000 posts using the hashtag Stand with Palestine in the past 2 weeks. So he's obviously pointing out to this danger or, this fear of this misinformation spreading to students who are perhaps susceptible and vulnerable to formation of an opinion which may necessarily not align with what the American values have been and what America has been doing with Israel for the past few decades. Professor Nalapat, I'm going to come to you. Well, it's very, very clear when you talk about the biggest supporter for Israel, sir. It's always in America. It's been America that comes to your mind. Americans are passionate about supporting Israel. Even if you ask, the local Caucasians in the United States, they all feel that the United States has to support Israel. But yet, TikTok, an application which India banned a few years ago, continues to project an image which is entirely misleading. It's a part of a disinformation, a misinformation campaign. And of course, the country and the word that comes to mind, when vested interests are concerned related to Palestine and anti-US sentiment, it's of course China.
Well, Vineet, the fact is that more than 3 years ago, this channel was talking about the toxicity of certain social media apps, and the Prime Minister, the ban that he introduced on a lot of apps, including TikTok, was welcome, because the fact is that warfare begins in the mind before it begins anywhere else, according to certain schools of warfare, including the traditional school of warfare in China. And from that point of view, the point is to weaken the social fiber of the enemy. And TikTok is a very good instrument for that. You look at Douyin, which is the Chinese version of TikTok. It's a very vanilla version of the American version of TikTok, or the version that was active in India. If you look, in the Chinese version, any kind of violence, any kind of activity that is negative to the government, it's impossible to find it. Whereas in TikTok, you will find a lot of violence, you'll find a lot of basically hate-mongering views about whichever government is in authority, the political parties, and various other pillars of society that are important for a democracy. So the reason why I am frankly surprised is that more democracies have not followed the example of India and Prime Minister Modi in banning TikTok and several of these apps, because these apps not only collect data, they also create situations where your mind space gets filled with toxic elements. The idea is not just to view China as an opportunity, but to view your own country in negative terms. Love China, the communist China, and hate your own country. That is what is subtly brought forward. And I'm sorry to say, TikTok has done immense damage. Jeff Morris is absolutely right. And the point is, when will the Americans, when will the Europeans, when will others in the world, when will they wake up to this problem? In Africa, Latin America, and all these places, you have a situation in which apps that are essentially controlled from within the Communist Party of China are sucking up data and conveying images and also creating algos. I had talked sometime many years ago of the Sino-Wahhabi lobby. Well, those people who are members of the lobby and who, unfortunately, many of them are employed in tech companies and the Sino-Wahhabi lobby, and they design algorithms that are designed precisely to filter out negative information about countries that they dislike, such as Israel, and very positive information about groups that they like, which is Hamas, which fits into China's geopolitical goals. So I would like to say, Vineet, this is old news for NewsX, if I may say so, but it seems to be new in the United States, and I'm surprised at that.
Pathakrit, thank you for joining us. Well, the danger that TikTok is posing, India was sapient enough, wise enough, prudent enough to realize this way in advance. Why are the Americans still dabbling with this application, which is not only compromising their security, but now is also, in effect, changing some sort of a social fabric that has existed for a pro-Israel feeling?
Vinith, first of all, I think the Trump administration did take certain actions against TikTok, but I think there were they got stay orders or they got quashed by the federal courts. That's where the problem starts. Secondly, yes, there's no denial of the fact that the Indian government did the right thing in terms of banning these Chinese applications. And these Chinese applications did have what Professor Nalaput also mentioned about, the surreptitious transfer of data from the handsets and the apps itself And their biggest problem is their connection with the CCP and the PLA. Most of the Chinese companies have to mandatorily have some kind of connection with the CCP and the PLA. In fact, PLA itself is an arm of the CCP. So to that extent, yes, it is a danger. And the genesis of the whole issue starts with the 863 program of China, which was started in the 1980s, wherein they took this initiative with the help of the Chinese government. It's a CCP project in terms of having cutting edge approach and technological superiority in areas of switching, networking, workstations, applications, and eventually social media became a very critical part of it. But let me also tell you, Vinit, this is just a replica of what the West has done for a long time. So I don't think the Chinese are doing, I am not an advocate of China, I'm a very strong critic of China. But the issue here is that weaponization of technology is happening from both sides. Today, the Americans are feeling jittery about what is happening in Middle East and how the Chinese are projecting. And frankly speaking, as a country, we are supporter of China. We are strong supporters of Israel. So we do not want the Hamas to be projected. The issue also is that this is same game which was played out and which is still being played out when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. In the Russia-Ukraine conflict, when it comes to the West, they have completely censored any kind of negative news so far as Zelensky was concerned, and they have projected President Putin as the biggest evil possible. So unfortunately, the reality is that in today's war era, you have a physical war and you have a disinformation war. Sometimes the impact of the disinformation war is far more profound in negative terms than the reality of the war. The bigger issue is how, and let's understand this, how these tech giants, especially which emanated from the West, have completely changed and altered the culture of the young generation. Today's young generation do not read books. They have not read books which would tell them or say, very, very epic, books like the Exodus or many other books which would have told them what happened in 1947-48. They do not know the history. And that is where the problem starts, because the moment they look at something on TikTok or anywhere else, whether it is in YouTube, they think that this is the gospel and this has to be believed. The whole culture of probing, the whole culture of reading, the whole culture of getting deeper into the issues is lacking. So I think, Vinit, as a country, what we should do, number one is this: there is this challenge that we are facing from both the sides. And let me tell you, I was watching one channel today in the morning, which is a Western channel of a country which is very pro-India, but the channels, the television channel was extremely anti-India. Throughout the day, they were showing news which was completely against the country. So unfortunately, what happens today, you have to have your own technologies. You cannot, beyond a point, expect the other country to do anything which will be favorable to you. The Chinese and the Russians, I do not support if they are supporting the Hamas, but they would consider that this is the payback time. And let me tell you, while we have done a lot of good things in terms of banning the apps, and while we have also done a lot of good things in terms of making sure that there is localization of manufacturing of the Chinese handsets, the data centers are still here. That's a good thing. But I still remain very much concerned about the overwhelming dominance of the Chinese mobile phones in the Indian market. That's a very, very big issue. So let's not presume that India is completely immune from the threat that we are facing. And the entire issue that happened during the COVID time and post-COVID time, issues related to supply chain challenges and everything else, we need to have our own companies coming out with, handsets. That hardware part is very critical. What we don't understand, you can ban an app, you can use a software to prevent a virus, but you cannot do anything if you have a virus or something which is implanted in your hardware. And that is where the Chinese are playing the second game. So overall, let me tell you one thing, we might be very much concerned, and we should be concerned about the narrative that is being portrayed so far as the Israel-Hamas war is concerned, because this war is very, very crucial. Nobody would love to see the Hamas winning the war, not even the Arab states. Unfortunately, there is a disinformation which is being projected as the truth, but the West is equally guilty of that when it comes to many other war. And that is where I remember one thing, let me tell you, Vineet, there was no social media that time, but the Rambo movie where Rambo went and, helped Afghanistan, fought against the Soviet army. Who were they training? Rambo was a CIA man, training the same Mujahids who eventually became Lashkar-e-Toiba, the same Lashkar-e-Toiba whom the Americans did not consider as a major terror organization till the time 26/11 happened and the Western people also died. So unfortunately, this is the reality of today's war. Everybody would have their own tool to play the disinformation game. Whoever becomes more successful eventually would be able to change the mindset of the coming generation, primarily because this new generation simply have given up the idea and the art of reading books. It's an evolving situation. Do I have a quick fix solution for that? I don't have. I don't think anybody has. We have to deal with it.
Okay, is Sumitra Goenka ji, social media expert, do you think this is an evolving situation? Or do you think that the Americans can never be so naive as to have this kind of a Chinese influence in their own backyard? If you remember, just a few months ago, officials of the American government had decided very vehemently that they will not be using TikTok, they will not be using Chinese-made phones. But yet, there is this huge influx of support from Palestine through a Chinese app in the United States. What kind of a threat is this for the United States, and are they doing enough?
Yeah. Hi, Vineet. See, I don't think that this is an evolving situation. This situation has always been there. We have been talking about data colonization and data sovereignty for a long time, and this age is of a age of data colonization. US has been doing this with all the other countries, like with their big tech companies. We have been facing data colonization. We have seen that how elections have been influenced. Like we saw in the case of Cambridge Analytica, we saw that the US election also was kind of influenced by other parties with the help of social media. Twitter had banned Donald Trump's account. I am not a supporter of Trump or I don't oppose him, but I'm just saying that, the free speech was stopped by Twitter, a big tech company, and views were not allowed. Similarly, in India also several voices were muzzled. Now, I remember that when there were protests in RA Colony against the felling of trees, a lot of content was actually coming from China and Pakistan on several handles which were operative on Twitter. So this kind of attacks have happened, and these kind of attacks were happening in the local language, which is a Marathi language as well. So it's not only, big tech companies have been misused, but there is a strong lobby which supports and funds these big tech companies to propagate such views. So this is an evolving situation in the sense, like we saw now in yesterday only we saw how Apple, few users of Apple who were from the opposition parties got sent a message, and there is a ripple in the democracy. Like Apple has not come clean on what happened, but of course it has shaken the democratic setup, and we are discussing about it. A lot of prime time debates are happening about it. So big tech has a lot of influence on what is being shown. So the content which is being shown is a potent weapon, I think, and it is influencing the mind of the youngsters, because youngsters right now are not really, focusing on one-to-one human interaction, but they are spending more time on several videos or YouTubes, or you can say TikToks or these kind of things, and it is a cause of concern because they are not getting trained also. Now, how this TikTok is really a potent weapon, I just want to quote one example. I believe in China, they are restricting the usage to 40 minutes a day for a youngster, and they are not allowing any other content which is harmful for the youngsters to be shown, whereas other places they are allowing all the harmful content. So this is a very, very serious situation, and I believe China is using this as a potent weapon to disturb the other economies or disturb the future generations, because if we are not able to curb this, India has been very prompt in, I think, banning TikTok, and we have also got some intermediary guidelines in place. US has always been talking about data protection, data privacy. Europe has come out with GDPR, social media rules they have, but I think this is a potent weapon which they have to realize and they have to ban. I think they have certain rules to do that, but they need to come clean now, and they have to really protect these kind of propaganda from disturbing the world order. I think this is a very serious thing which is happening as of now, and it can change the world order if it is not being taken care of in a very strong way.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Sumitra ji, you make a compelling point. Rashmi Samant, do you think that such a trend precipitated by a surreptitious intention like China has always had is responsible in the future to change trends and affect young minds and cause a lot of unwanted trouble, maybe perhaps not only for the Americans, but for the Europeans also, for people living in the UK as well, because there is a strong lobby in the United Kingdom as well that is pro-Palestine. I've seen a number of YouTube channels. I've seen Piers Morgan talk to a number of people who live in the United Kingdom and continue to support Palestine as if it was their own country.
Well, I think if you look at the Chinese history, then there's always been the whole Great Leap Forward. There's been the Cultural Revolution. They've been masters of propaganda since day one. I feel like that's been the foundation of their country, the way the regime works and the way they've maintained power for a very long time. I've read the whole thing, and I feel like the whole woke movement now is sort of a modern adaptation or like a co-option of the whole cultural revolution, the whole woke movement that you see, wherein narratives are just weaponized in the name of being politically correct or in the name of being holier than thou. And somehow, there's this compulsion on everybody to speak out and, call out others. And that entire urge to call out others often has led young people to rely on misinformed, little TikTok videos to form their opinions. And I think that's shameful because the urge to make an opinion is so instilled by the environment on social media that people are comfortable making opinions before even knowing much about it. And their knowledge is coming out of platforms like TikTok. Another problem that I see with social media platforms is definitely that, of course, all of us do have the liberty somewhat of putting up content. But how it gets amplified is completely up to the internal algorithms, which we are not so privy to. And what we see now, the amplification of one kind of narrative over the other, is definitely somewhere or the other the internal strings being pulled up by the sort of editorial direction that the company, that the social media giant or whosoever pull the strings behind the scenes for these companies and organizations do tow. So there's literally so much evidence to us so as to why certain type of content is being amplified on platforms like TikTok. And we see firsthand the kind of impact it has had. I mean, campuses, my own campus in Oxford has had so many pro-Palestine protests where they're calling the Hamas terrorists resistance soldiers. It's come to that point where people are happily whitewashing terrorism. They're happily justifying terrorism. And the meaning of right and wrong is just lost in this barrage of propaganda and narratives, which is being carefully curated in spaces where the youth is exposed. And I think the people I see most affected by this are between 18 to 24, my age group. It's literally us. And it's harrowing to see what effect it will have on the future. That being said, I think every democracy out there needs to take actions to protect itself.
Right. Okay. Well, that's a good point. We've run out of time as well. I'm going to take a concluding thought from Professor Nalapat. Professor Nalapat, what action should India take at this point in time to insulate itself from any future threat?
Well, I'd like to say that the young people in particular, they need to understand the importance of a strong India to their own lives and to their own futures. And they need to understand the importance of the victory of democracies over authoritarian forces in Cold War 2.0. Otherwise, their own lives are going to be severely impacted. Now, I mean, the Ukrainians were, those Ukrainians who were against Russia, and even against Russian-speaking Ukrainians, they were lulled into a false sense of feeling that they were invincible and that Russia could be crushed. And now they themselves are paying a very heavy price indeed for what is happening. So you have, for example, in Gaza, you have people who believe that Hamas was invincible, that Hamas could do anything and get away with it. And if that is allowed to happen, well, that will spread in the West Bank as well. And soon Hamas, or an organization like Hamas, will control the West Bank. So on both sides of Israel, you'll have extremely hostile terror groups basically pushing against both sides of Israel. So it's very important that the danger be understood, the threat be understood. It has to begin in school, it has to begin in classrooms, and it has to begin through social media. We have to check and see who are these algo warriors of the Sino-Wahhabi lobby that are basically infecting content. In Ms. Saman's case, for example, I think Sunday Guardian was the first to report that the Sino-Pakistan lobby was very active against her on the campus of her university. And all kinds of completely erroneous impressions of her were planted. And unfortunately, that lobby had a free run because nobody else did anything about it. So that kind of algo warriors need to be identified, and young people in particular need to be conscientized about the danger, including the danger to their own lives. All that awaits them is misery in case the authoritarian states succeed in basically making us unconfident, making us hate our own country, hate our own people, and basically making us, useless for an age in which collaboration and cooperation is very important.
On what's really going on, not only in the United States, but that can be said for the rest of the world as well.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.